smushing together. And no one make too much noises. Better. Closing. It's gonna be a lot of bloopers in this one. Hi crafty people! Today I'm sharing with you my top 10 tips for sewing clothing for children. We're going to be learning how to pick a fabric, how to size clothes, all the way down to the best seam to be used. I hope that this is useful for you and that you enjoy it. And if I've missed any tips that you think are really useful, please comment below so you can help us as we all work out the best ways to sew kids' clothes together. My name's Marie, and this channel is all about motivating mums to make and mend. I hope you're motivated to make some kid clothes after you watch today's video, and let's get started with our tips.
Kid clothes sewing tips!
Tip number 1. Fabric choice is key. Even the most simple pattern can look really amazing if you've chosen the correct fabric. A fabric with a nice print or a really lovely texture or just a really well-made quality fabric. It can make all the difference. I'd really recommend looking for natural fibers if you can rather than synthetic. And if you're looking for a fabric with a print on it, try and keep in mind how big the piece of clothing will be. If it's a fabric that you're using for a baby or a really small child, the bigger prints won't be very visible once you cut out your pattern pieces because each piece will be so small that patterns might be hard to see. Also, when you're fabric shopping, it's good to keep in mind what the washing instructions are for that fabric. Some fabrics need to be hand washed. Personally, avoid them. Also, some fabrics need to be ironed, such as rayon. Linen also gets pretty wrinkly. That's the way linen's meant to be. But if you're not into clothes that look wrinkly, I'd probably stay away from linen, even though it is a nice natural fiber. So before you start your sewing project, really think carefully about what you want it to look like and think carefully about what type of fabric will best meet your needs. Tip number 2, make it comfy. Kids don't want to wear clothes that are going to make them feel uncomfortable, so things that are tight, restrictive for movement, or that are going to be itchy, whether it's an itchy fabric or whether it's got lace in certain places that are going to be uncomfortable, they all need to be taken into consideration before you make your item of clothing. Stretch fabrics are usually that little bit more comfortable than a woven fabric. For example, a stretchy t-shirt is usually more comfortable than something like this, which is more of a structured, not very stretchy fabric at all. So kids' clothes, it's usually good to use a stretchy fabric, something soft and something that's going to be nice and breathable. So again, a natural fiber if possible. Tip number 3, pre-wash your fabric. This means that once you receive your fabric, you need to wash it before you start making anything with it. The reason for this is fabric can shrink. It would be a shame to make something using your fabric and then chuck it in the wash and have it shrink and be unusable. I make sure that I'm picking fabrics that can be machine washable. Then I am pre-washing that fabric in my washing machine as soon as I get home. So we're here in my laundry and I'm going to show you how I pre-wash my fabrics. We wash all our clothes on a cold wash. If you do a warm wash, you'll need to check your fabric to see if that's appropriate for the fabric you're using. And with fabric, the same as with new clothes, there is the possibility that the colors might run. So you can chuck a color catcher in there as well if you'd like to, or just wash them all with colors that you know won't matter if they run. So I turn my machine on, I've switched it to a daily wash setting, which is what we use on our regular clothes, set it to cold and it's ready to go. These are the exact settings I use for washing our clothes, and that way I know that once the fabric has gone through the same setting, it won't shrink anymore once it actually becomes the item of clothing that I make out of it. Tip number 4, watch your kids play. Now this might seem a bit of a strange tip, but what I mean by this is as you're watching your kids play, look at how their clothes behave. Do they need stretch in certain parts? Or are your kids really rough on their knees and they might need some patches there to help reinforce that part of the material? Are your kids exceptionally tall and when they're playing their ankles are always showing, which might make them a bit cold? Or are your kids really struggling with their pants falling down all the time and you might need to take them in? Watching your children play is going to be really helpful in knowing how to best size the clothes, fit them to your child, and also use the right fabric to meet your child's needs. Tip number 5, use appropriate closures. The most common closures that I see on baby clothes are zips and little snaps, press studs. Now for me, I personally basically only buy baby clothes with zips in it these days. They're just so much faster to zip up than snapping all the clothes, especially if your baby is not too fond of being changed. For me, I prefer baby clothes with zips on it. If you can put a zip on the baby clothes, then do that. Toddlers and preschoolers, I'd probably recommend using elastic where possible. So Elijah here is in this flannelette button-up shirt, and he has these pants here that are the right size in the length but a bit big on him in the waist, so it's got a drawstring. Very handy, except when they want to take themselves to the toilet and then it's hard to do. Bit too tricky? Yeah. So ta-da! Nice and comfy. We've got an elasticated waist here so that it's a bit easier to stay up without the drawstring, and just a simple shirt to pull over his neck. Does that feel better?
Yes.
More comfortable?
Yes.
Alright, off you go to play then.
Now Abby's turn.
For children who are over 5, buttons and drawstrings and pretty much any closure can work. You just want to keep in mind what they are capable of actually doing. Which leads me into point number 6, autonomy. Make their clothing autonomous. By this, I mean think about what is age appropriate for your child, and if they're able to dress themselves, think about how you can assist them to do that. So for example, my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old, they're not very good with using buttons, so I don't choose to use buttons on clothing that I want them to get dressed in themselves. I might use buttons on like a fancy shirt that we might wear out to church or going to a wedding, but on their everyday play clothes where they're wanting to get dressed by themselves, I try and avoid buttons or drawstrings on pants if they don't know how to tie up their pants by themselves. Also with the topic of autonomy, I'm sure you've all seen children with their clothes on the wrong way or their shoes on the wrong feet, and I really want to help my children have the best chance possible of getting dressed the right way. One of the ways I do that is by putting a little fake tag in the back of their clothing. They're used to looking in their clothes for where the tag is so that they can put their shirts on the right way, or they pull their pants up with the tag at the back. So in clothing that I've made, I like to do the same thing. I just cut a little piece of ribbon and I sew it in the seam so that as they're getting dressed, they have that autonomy to know what way their clothes go on and they're able to get themselves dressed properly. Tip number 7, check the fit. As you're making the item of clothing for your child, it's best to try that item on your child through each of the stages so that you can try it on and see how each part is fitting. For example, if you sew the body of an item first before the sleeves, try the body on even without the sleeves, see how it's fitting. Why you laugh? Ticklish? It's a lot easier to adjust something at each stage than finishing an item and realizing that a few steps back you should have done something differently and having to unstitch things to get back to that point of being able to fix it. So my recommendation is to keep checking how it's fitting at regular intervals so that at each stage you're trying it on your child, seeing how it's fitting, and then moving on to the next step. Tip number 8, have the option of sizing up. By this, I don't mean that you have to make your item of clothing too big so it's baggy and uncomfortable, but what I mean is to make your item of clothing so that it fits and is comfortable, but that it will last more than one season. You could do this by leaving a long hem on the bottom of a skirt so that as your child gets taller, you could let that hem down. Or if you've got something with an elasticated waist, you could cut more elastic than you need and cross it over a lot more so you've got a bit of extra, so that as your child grows, you're able to unstitch that elastic and expand it so that it gets bigger with the same elastic that you've sewn in there originally. But try and think ahead so that you're not just making something that will fit for this season, but how can you really plan ahead to make this item grow with your child. Tip number 9, add pockets. We love pockets, our kids love pockets. Pockets are great. And I know that my kids sometimes specifically don't choose to wear items of clothes if they know that it doesn't have a pocket. There are lots of great and easy ways that you can add pockets to clothes. If you've got a side seam in your item of clothing, that's an easy way to add a pocket. You could sew a pocket on top of an item of clothing, and some patterns have pockets already inbuilt within the actual item. If you'd like a more detailed video about how to add pockets to your patterns or to clothes you already have, I'd love to make that video for you. Just let me know in the comments below so that I know that's something that you'd like me to make for you. Tip number 10 is to use French seams. A French seam is a way to finish off your seam so that it's nice and flat and it's not very uncomfortable or itchy. A French seam is a lovely finish and a lovely way to make kids' clothes more comfortable. A French seam is where you sew the items together wrong sides together first, and then you flip it out so that you then sew the right sides together, which creates an extra line of stitching that hides your seam. It really is a nice comfortable way to have a seam on an item of clothing. It also looks really nice. It prevents your fabric from fraying as well. So it's a really great option when you're making kids clothes. So there you have it. They are 10 of my top tips for sewing kids clothes. If you've got any other tips you'd like to share with us, leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Next week we're going to be making a dress for my daughter, and I will be using a lot of these tips in next week's video. So if you would like to see me using these tips really practically, then I recommend you come back next week to watch that video. Follow me along on Instagram to see what I've been up to, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye! That was a lot of talking.